The afternoon sun was warm and bright, shining over a small-town gas station at the edge of the highway. Cars came and went every few minutes, their engines humming as drivers stopped for fuel, snacks, or a quick wash. Near the far corner of the station, a young boy stood with a bucket, a few old towels, and a bottle of soap. He couldn't have been older than 16, yet his hands already looked like they belonged to someone much older. Rough, dry, and tired. He had been washing cars here for nearly 2 years. Every day after school, he would come straight to the gas station, roll up his sleeves, and work until sunset. He wasn't doing it because he loved washing cars. He was doing it because his family needed the money. His mother worked long hours at a small diner nearby, and his little sister had just started school. Their father wasn't around anymore. He had left long ago, and the boy had learned to live without expecting anyone to come back. Life was simple but hard, yet through all the struggles he never complained. He believed that one day his hard work would pay off. The boy had a quiet dream: to save enough money to go to a mechanics course after finishing school. He loved fixing things. Old cars fascinated him, and sometimes he would stand outside the mechanics shop next to the gas station, watching the men work on engines, trying to learn from a distance. He didn't have the money for lessons, but he had curiosity, and that was a start. Most customers who came for a car wash liked him. He always greeted them with a smile, worked carefully, and never asked for extra. Some would even tip him a few dollars, saying he reminded them of their own kids. Those small gestures meant the world to him. He would fold the money neatly and keep it in his pocket until the end of the day, then hand most of it to his mother. She always told him she was proud, and that was enough to keep him going. But not everyone who stopped there was kind. Sometimes people mocked him for being just a car wash boy. A few laughed when they saw him scrubbing dirty tires in the heat. He had learned to ignore it. The more he stayed quiet, the easier it became to block out the noise. That day started like any other. He reached the gas station early, filled the bucket with water, and set up his small space. The owner of the station, an older man who treated him kindly, gave him a thumbs up before heading inside to handle customers. The boy wiped sweat from his forehead and got to work, cleaning the dusty side of a pickup truck parked nearby. As he was drying the windows, the distant sound of roaring engines filled the air. It was deep and heavy, the kind of sound that made everyone look up. Within moments, several motorcycles appeared on the road heading toward the station. They weren't the kind of bikes people rode for quiet fun. These were large, loud, and covered in chrome. The men riding them wore black leather vests, sunglasses, and heavy boots. There must have been 6 or 7 of them, each one looking like they owned the road. The boy had seen them before. They often passed through town on weekends, stopping for gas or coffee. Most times they didn't bother anyone, but their presence alone was enough to make people uncomfortable. They were rough, loud, and used to getting attention wherever they went. He quietly stepped aside as the group parked their bikes near the pumps. The sound of engines died down, leaving behind the smell of fuel and smoke. A few of them headed inside the small diner next door, while 3 of them stayed behind, talking and laughing near their motorcycles. The boy didn't want to stare, so he went back to work. The heat was rising and the soap bubbles were drying too fast on the truck, so he moved faster. That's when one of the bikers noticed him. "Hey, kid," the man called out. His voice was rough, loud, and carried easily across the lot. The boy looked up quickly, unsure if the man was speaking to him. "Yeah, you washing cars, right? Come give mine a clean," he said, pointing to his large black bike. The boy nodded quickly and picked up his bucket. "Sure, sir. I'll do it right away." He walked toward the bike, careful not to make any sudden moves. The biker leaned back, watching him with a smirk. His 2 friends laughed quietly between themselves, saying something the boy couldn't hear. He bent down and began to rinse the metal surface, careful not to splash water on the man's boots. The biker crossed his arms, tapping his foot impatiently. "Faster," the man said after a few seconds. "You think I got all day?" The boy nodded again, speeding up his movements. The chrome of the bike reflected the sunlight sharply. It was spotless already, but he didn't want to take chances. He knew that with people like this, one wrong look could mean trouble. Still, he kept his calm. His hands trembled slightly as he wiped the handles and mirrors. One of the other bikers chuckled and said, "Look at this kid. Probably never touched a real bike before." The boy didn't answer. He just focused on cleaning. Then suddenly one of them kicked at the bucket lightly with his boot, spilling the soapy water across the pavement. The boy froze. "Oops," the biker said sarcastically. "Guess you'll have to start over." The two others laughed again. The boy quickly grabbed the bucket and went to refill it, keeping his eyes down. His heart was beating fast now, but he didn't want to show it. He just wanted to finish and move on. When he returned, the biker leaned closer and said, "You look nervous, kid. Don't worry. We don't bite unless someone gives us a reason." The boy forced a small smile, pretending not to hear the last part. He went back to work, cleaning as quickly as he could. Inside the diner nearby, a few customers had noticed what was happening. They didn't like it, but nobody wanted to interfere. People had seen enough of these bikers to know they could cause trouble if provoked. Still, a few faces pressed against the window, watching quietly. At one corner table sat two men, both large and broad-shouldered, eating lunch after what looked like a long morning. They were laughing softly, enjoying their food, until the sound of raised voices outside caught their attention. The taller man looked up first, his expression changing as he saw the boy crouched by the bike, while the bikers stood around him laughing. He frowned and nudged his friend. The other man turned to look, and the moment he saw what was going on, his smile faded. They both recognized the situation immediately, one they had seen too many times before. A small act of cruelty just because someone thought they could get away with it. The taller man put down his fork slowly and said, "Let's go check that out." The other nodded without hesitation. They stood up, their shadows stretching across the diner floor as they walked toward the door. Outside, the boy was trying to dry the bike when one of the bikers said something that made the others laugh again. The sound was sharp and cold, echoing through the gas station. The boy didn't reply. He just kept working, hoping they'd get bored soon and leave. But before he could finish, the biker snapped, "You missed a spot," and pointed to the bottom of the wheel. The boy bent down to wipe it. His hand brushed against the man's boot by accident. The biker's expression hardened. He stared down at the boy for a moment, then said, "Watch where you put your hands." The boy quickly apologized, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" The man raised his hand slightly, not to hit him, but to make him flinch. "Next time, be careful." The boy stepped back, holding the towel tightly. His throat felt dry. At that moment, the diner door opened and two men walked out. Their presence was impossible to ignore, tall, solid, and confident. They didn't look angry, but their faces carried a calm seriousness that demanded attention. The biker noticed them and straightened up slightly, his smirk fading for the first time. The boy turned too, surprised to see them. The taller of the two men spoke first, his voice deep and steady. "Is there a problem here?" The biker looked at him, then at his friend beside him and said, "No problem. Just talking to the kid." The other man stepped closer, standing beside the boy now, his tone polite but firm. It didn't sound like just talking. A quiet tension filled the air. The rest of the bikers who had gone inside came out slowly, realizing something was happening. The gas station fell silent except for the soft hum of passing cars in the distance. The boy stood between them, unsure of what to do. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know who these men were, but there was something about the way they stood, strong but calm, protective but not violent, that made him feel safe for the first time that day. The taller man looked at the boy and asked softly, "You okay, son?" The boy nodded quickly, still clutching the towel. The man gave a small nod, then turned his gaze back to the bikers. The moment felt heavy, like something important was about to happen. The kind of moment that would change everything that came after. And in that quiet space, between fear and courage, between noise and calm, something shifted. The boy didn't know it yet, but from that day forward, his life would never be the same again. The sound of the highway faded into the background as tension filled the small gas station. The boy stood frozen beside the bike, his wet towel hanging loosely from his hand. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could tell the air had changed. The bikers who had been laughing moments ago were now quiet, watching the two men who had stepped out of the diner. The taller man, broad-shouldered and calm, stood a few feet away from the group. The other, equally built but slightly shorter, crossed his arms, his expression steady. They weren't angry, but there was something powerful about the way they carried themselves, like they didn't need to raise their voices to be heard. One of the bikers smirked, trying to hide his unease. "We were just talking to the kid," he said, shrugging. "Didn't know it was a crime to have a conversation." The taller man gave a small nod. "That's fine," he replied calmly. "But from where I was sitting, it didn't look like much of a conversation." The biker laughed, trying to shake off the tension. "Oh, come on, big guy, you don't know what you saw." The boy looked between them nervously. He could feel everyone's eyes on him, the men, the customers at the diner window, even the station owner who had quietly stepped outside but stayed at a distance. He didn't want anyone to get hurt. The man beside him spoke gently, his voice low enough that only the boy could hear. "Don't worry. Just stay calm." Something about that voice felt safe, steady, almost reassuring. The lead biker, the one who had spilled the boy's bucket earlier, looked annoyed now. He didn't like being challenged, especially in front of his group. He stepped forward slightly, trying to make his presence bigger. "Look, we don't need strangers telling us how to talk. You mind your own business." The taller man didn't move an inch. He simply said, "When someone bullies a kid, it becomes everyone's business." The words hung in the air, simple but powerful. A few of the other bikers shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered something under his breath, but the leader ignored it. He kept his eyes on the man in front of him. "You think you can just walk out here and talk to me like that?" The shorter man, quiet until now, took a small step forward, his face calm, but his tone serious. He didn't think it. He did it. The crowd that had gathered around began whispering. A few people pulled out their phones, recording what looked like a scene straight out of a movie. But this wasn't a movie. It was happening right there in the middle of a hot afternoon, at a small-town gas station, where a boy who just wanted to earn a few dollars suddenly found himself in the center of something big. The boy swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, to tell them it was okay, but the words wouldn't come out. The biker crossed his arms, staring hard at the two men. "You've got guts," he said. "You really think you're going to stand there and tell us what to do?" The taller man didn't answer right away. He looked down at the boy, then back at the biker. "No," he said finally. "I'm just reminding you that respect costs nothing. You might want to try it sometime." The biker clenched his jaw. He didn't like being talked down to, but he also couldn't ignore the fact that people were watching. The cameras, the whispers, the phones held high. It was all getting to him. His friends looked unsure, not wanting to escalate things. The taller man noticed the hesitation in their faces. He softened his tone a little and said, "You've got an audience now. What you do next is what they'll remember. Not the bikes, not the jackets, just your actions." The biker looked around, realizing the truth in those words. But pride is a powerful thing. He forced a laugh and said, "You talk too much for a big guy." The man smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I'd rather talk than see someone get hurt." The biker stepped closer, close enough for the boy to smell the leather of his vest. The boy took a step back, bumping into the shorter man, who placed a steady hand on his shoulder, guiding him gently behind him. The taller man kept his gaze fixed on the biker, who seemed torn between anger and uncertainty. "What are you trying to prove?" the man asked quietly. For a long moment there was silence. The biker didn't answer. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he just didn't like being called out. Behind them, one of the other bikers whispered, "Let's go, man, it's not worth it." The leader didn't move. He looked at his bike, at the spilled water drying in the sun, then at the boy who still looked frightened. Something in the kid's face, his trembling hands, his wide eyes, made him pause. The taller man took a small step forward, closing the space between them but keeping his voice even. "You don't have to be the bad guy today," he said. "Walk away. That's what real strength looks like." The biker's jaw tightened. For a few seconds it looked like he might say something back. But then he looked at the people recording, at the two men standing firm but calm, and he finally took a step back. He turned to his group and muttered, "Let's get out of here." Reluctantly, the others followed. The engines roared back to life, and one by one they rolled away from the gas station, their noise fading down the highway. The crowd let out a quiet sigh of relief. Some clapped softly, others simply watched in disbelief. The boy stood there still trying to process what had just happened. His heart was pounding in his chest, but slowly, the fear was replaced by a strange feeling, something between gratitude and awe. The shorter man turned to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said softly. "You stayed calm." The boy looked up at him. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't know what to do." "You didn't have to do anything," the taller man said with a small smile. "Sometimes the right people just show up." He said it so naturally, like it was no big deal, but the boy could tell there was kindness behind the words. The station owner came out and thanked them both, shaking their hands. "You handled that better than anyone else could have," he said. They both smiled modestly. "We just don't like seeing people picked on," the shorter man replied. "That's all." The boy nodded, still in shock. "I really thought he was going to hurt me." The taller man looked at him and said, "You don't need to think about that now. You're safe." The boy glanced at the empty road where the bikers had gone. "I just wanted to wash their bikes," he said quietly, almost to himself. The man's expression softened. "You were doing your job. Don't ever feel small for being honest workin'." Something about those words stuck with the boy. He looked down at his worn-out shoes and nodded. The shorter man reached into his pocket and handed the boy a few bills. "Here," he said, "for the trouble." The boy tried to refuse, shaking his head quickly. No, I can't take that. You already helped me." The man smiled and said, "Then take it as a thank you for reminding us what humility looks like." The boy hesitated, then took it, whispering another thank you. The two men started walking back toward the diner. Before they went in, the taller one turned back and said, "Keep working hard, kid. You've got something special in you. Don't let people like that make you doubt it." The boy didn't answer. He just nodded, holding on to those words like they were something precious. The crowd slowly began to scatter. The gas station returned to its usual hum of activity, but the air still carried a different energy, something lighter, warmer. The boy went back to his corner, filled his bucket again, and resumed washing cars. But this time his heart felt steadier. As he worked, he kept glancing at the diner window. Through the glass, he could see the two men laughing again, eating their food like nothing had happened. But for the boy, everything had changed. He didn't know their names yet, but he knew they were someone important, not just because people recognized them, but because of how they acted. The world was full of strong people, but not everyone used their strength to lift others up. He smiled a little, even as the sun beat down on his back. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. Later that evening, after finishing his shift, he walked home along the same road the bikers had taken earlier. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink. The wind was cool now, carrying the faint smell of gasoline and dust. He replayed the whole scene in his mind, the noise, the fear, the calm voices that silenced everything. It didn't feel real, but it was. When he reached home, his mother was already waiting. She looked tired but smiled when she saw him. "You look different today," she said, noticing his quiet expression. The boy smiled faintly. "It was just an interesting day," he said. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. He just said that two kind men helped him when some rude people gave him a hard time. His mother nodded and said, "Good people still exist in this world. Never forget that." He went to bed that night with those words in his heart. The day had scared him, but it had also shown him something: kindness, courage, and a glimpse of the strength that comes from standing up for what's right. And though he didn't know it yet, that moment at the gas station was only the beginning of a story that would travel far beyond their small town, changing his life forever. The next morning, the town was still talking about what had happened at the gas station. People had seen the videos online, shared by someone who had recorded the whole thing from across the road. By the time the boy woke up, the clip had already spread everywhere. It wasn't violent or dramatic. It was just a quiet moment where two men had stepped in to stop someone from being cruel. But somehow, it touched hearts. The boy didn't know any of this yet. He woke up early, just like he always did, washed his face, and got ready for work. His mother was cooking breakfast, humming softly. When he came out of his small room, she looked up from the stove and said, "You're up early again?" He smiled a little. "Yeah, I want to get there before the rush." She handed him a plate and said, "Be careful, all right? And don't forget your lunch." He nodded, picked up his small bag, and walked out the door. The morning air was cool and fresh. The town was quiet except for a few cars passing by. He didn't expect anything unusual to happen that day. He just wanted to keep working. When he reached the gas station, something felt different. The station owner was standing outside, talking to a few people he didn't recognize. They all seemed excited about something. When they noticed the boy, one of them smiled and said, "Hey, it's the kid from the video." The boy blinked, confused. "Video?" The owner grinned. "Someone recorded what happened yesterday. It's all over the internet. You should have seen it. People are calling you brave." The boy shook his head quickly. "I didn't do anything," the owner chuckled. "Well, you were there. And those two men, The Rock and John Cena, they stood up for you. People love that kind of story. You've got no idea how big this is." The boy's mouth fell open a little. The Rock and John Cena? He had heard their names before, of course. Everyone had. They were famous all over the world, actors, wrestlers, and people known for helping others. He had just thought they were strong, kind strangers who stepped in when no one else did. He had no clue who they really were. The owner laughed at his expression. "You mean you didn't know?" They were in town for a charity event. Guess fate brought them here at the right time. The boy felt his face warm with surprise. I didn't even thank them properly." The owner patted his shoulder. "Don't worry, kid. You'll probably see them again. Word is they're still around." The boy nodded quietly and went back to his usual corner, setting up his bucket and rags. But his mind wasn't calm anymore. Every time he thought about what had happened, his chest filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. He couldn't stop thinking about how close he had been to getting hurt, and how those two men had stepped in so naturally without a second thought. As he worked, people passing by started recognizing him. Some waved, others gave him thumbs up. A few even stopped to get their cars washed, just so they could talk to him. They asked questions, took photos, and told him how proud they were of him. It was strange. He had never been the center of attention before. At first, he didn't know how to handle it. He was shy, soft-spoken, and didn't like being praised. But as the day went on, he realized people weren't just cheering for him. They were cheering for kindness. The story had reminded them that even small acts of courage matter. Around noon, the sound of heavy engines filled the air again. The boy froze for a moment, his hand tightening around the towel. But when he turned to look, it wasn't the same group of bikers. It was just a few travelers passing by. He let out a slow breath and tried to focus on his work. That's when a black SUV pulled into the station. The windows were tinted, and for a moment he thought it might be someone famous again. The door opened, and to his surprise, out stepped the two men from yesterday, The Rock and John Cena. The boy almost dropped the towel in his hand. He blinked several times, wondering if he was seeing right, but it was really them, both dressed simply without any showy clothes or cameras. The Rock waved when he saw the boy staring. "Hey there, champ," he said with a big smile. "Looks like you're back at work early." The boy's words stumbled out. I didn't know it was really you. I mean, yesterday. I didn't even say thank you." John Cena chuckled softly. "You don't have to thank us, kid. You handled yourself well. We just did what anyone should do." The boy shook his head. "No one else did. Only you." The Rock smiled warmly and said, "Sometimes people freeze when things like that happen. Doesn't mean they don't care. You'd be surprised how much courage it takes to step in." The boy nodded slowly. He still couldn't believe he was standing in front of two world-famous people. They looked the same as they did on TV, but somehow even kinder in person. The Rock leaned on the hood of the SUV and said, "We saw the video going viral this morning. Guess the world needed a reminder that decency still exists." The boy looked down at his shoes. "I didn't want it to go viral. I just wanted to forget it happened." John Cena nodded. "I get that. But sometimes stories like yours help others. Somewhere out there, a kid will see you and realize it's okay to stay kind even when life gets hard." The boy looked up, surprised. "You really think so?" "I know so," Cena said with a reassuring smile. You've got heart and people see that. For a while, they just talked. Nothing fancy and just real human conversation. The Rock asked about his family, about school, and about his dreams. When the boy mentioned wanting to become a mechanic, both men listened carefully. That's a solid dream, the Rock said. You've got skills already, I can tell. Keep going and don't let anyone make you feel small for working hard. John Cena nodded in agreement. Most people forget that every great story starts with struggle. What you're doing now, working for your family, saving for your goals, and that's real strength. The boy couldn't stop smiling. He didn't know what to say. Just hearing those words from them meant more than anything. After a few minutes, the Rock looked at Cena and said, "We've got to head to that event soon." Then he turned back to the boy and said, "You should come by tonight. There's a community fundraiser at the town center. Free food, music, all that good stuff. We'd like you to be there." The boy's eyes widened.
Me? But
"I'm nobody special." Cena smiled and said, "You're part of this story now. People want to meet you. Don't hide from it. Just be yourself." The boy hesitated, unsure. "I don't have nice clothes or anything," the Rock chuckled. "Trust me, kid. No one's going to care what you wear. They'll care who you are." They waved goodbye and drove off, leaving the boy standing there, still processing what had just happened. The station owner came out a few minutes later, grinning from ear to ear. "You're going to that event, right?" "You better. The whole town will be there." That evening, after finishing work, the boy rushed home. His mother was shocked when he told her everything, that he had met the Rock and John Cena again, and that they had invited him to the fundraiser. She teared up when she heard how they had defended him. "There are still good people in the world," she said softly. "And they saw something in you, my son. Don't ever forget that." They found him a clean shirt and pressed his old pair of pants. It wasn't fancy, but it was neat. He brushed his hair carefully and walked to the town center with his mother as the sun went down. The place was crowded, lights hanging between trees, music playing, people laughing. It was the liveliest he had ever seen the town. When he walked in, a few people recognized him and waved. He felt shy at first, but then he spotted the Rock and Cena talking to a group of kids. They waved him over. "Hey, you made it," Cena said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Glad you came." The Rock grinned. "Told you, didn't I? You're part of this now." The boy looked around amazed. Everyone seemed happy, like for one night all the worries of life had disappeared. He saw families dancing, children playing, and people coming together, all because of a story that started in a small gas station. The Rock gave a short speech on stage later that night. He talked about kindness, about standing up for what's right, and about how heroes don't always wear capes or have cameras around them. Sometimes heroes are quiet people doing honest work, like the boy who just wanted to help his family. The crowd clapped loudly, and when the Rock gestured toward the boy, everyone cheered. The boy's face turned red, but he couldn't stop smiling. His mother wiped her eyes, proud beyond words. As the music played again, the Rock leaned down and said to him, "You see that? That's the power of doing the right thing. Never underestimate it." The boy nodded, still speechless. That night, as the stars filled the sky, he realized something important. He didn't have to be rich or famous to make a difference. Sometimes, just staying kind in a world that isn't always kind is enough to change everything. And though he didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of how his small act of humility and courage would continue to inspire people everywhere. When the Rock and John Cena stepped outside that diner, the noise of the engines faded a little. The crowd that had gathered earlier was still there, whispering and recording everything. The biker who had pushed the boy stood beside his motorcycle, trying to act tough, though something in his eyes showed that he was a little unsure now. The Rock took slow steps toward him, his large frame calm but full of power. Cena followed a few steps behind, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the biker gang. The boy was standing quietly near the water bucket, his shirt still wet from when he fell. His hands trembled slightly, but when he saw the Rock looking at him, he felt a strange kind of comfort. There was something about the way that man carried himself, not just strength but calmness, the kind that said everything would be fine. The Rock stopped a few feet away from the biker and said in a deep but steady voice, "Hey, that's enough." The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The biker laughed, trying to hide his nervousness. "Who's gonna stop me?" he said, his tone mocking. John Cena took a step forward, his expression serious. We are, he said. The people in the crowd gasped when they realized who the two men actually were. Some whispered, "That's The Rock." Others said, "Is that really John Cena?" Phones lifted higher, recording every second. The biker's smile faded slightly when he noticed the attention, but pride made him keep his act up. "You think I'm scared of some Hollywood guys?" he muttered, pretending to laugh. The Rock didn't react to the insult. He just looked at the boy and said gently, "You okay, kid?" The boy nodded, still speechless. Cena looked at him too and said, "Don't worry. How did nothing wrong?" The biker stepped closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. "He spilled water on my bike," he said, pointing at the boy. He should learn respect. The Rock's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "Respect?" he said slowly. "You think shoving a kid around makes you respected?" The biker shifted his weight, realizing that the crowd had gone quiet. The only sound was the wind and the low rumble of the gang's motorcycles. "You don't know who you're talking to," the biker said, though his voice didn't sound as strong now. "I don't need to," the Rock said, "because I can see who you are by what you just did." He took a step forward, and though he wasn't trying to be threatening, his presence alone made everyone feel his power. Real strength isn't shown by hurting people who can't fight back. Real strength is control, knowing when to stop. Cena nodded and said, "You could have just told the kid to clean it again." "You didn't have to shove him." The biker didn't respond. His friends who had been laughing earlier were now quiet too. They didn't seem as confident with the crowd, and the cameras all pointed at them. The Rock turned slightly to the crowd. "Everyone here saw what happened," he said. "The world doesn't need more people trying to act tough. What it needs is people who know how to stand up for others." The biker's jaw tightened. He looked around and saw several phones recording, faces watching him, some angry, some disappointed. He looked embarrassed, like a person who suddenly realizes he made a big mistake. The Rock walked closer until he was just a few steps away. "You've got a choice," he said quietly so only the biker could hear. "You can walk away right now, or you can keep acting tough and regret it later. What's it gonna be?" The biker looked down for a moment, then back at the Rock. The tension in the air was thick, but everyone could feel it slowly shifting. The biker finally muttered, "Fine," and turned toward his bike. One of his friends whispered something like, "Let's go," and the gang began to start their engines. The sound of the motorcycles filled the air again, but this time it didn't sound as powerful, more like an escape. Before leaving, the biker glanced at the boy and said, "Watch where you're going next time." It wasn't as harsh as before, almost like he was trying to save face. Then they rode off one by one, their engines fading into the distance. The crowd burst into applause. Some people whistled, others shouted the names of The Rock and Cena. The boy stood there, still stunned, trying to take it all in. The Rock smiled at him and said, "Hey, breathe. It's over now." Cena put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did the right thing. You stayed calm," he said. "That takes guts." The boy looked up, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. The Rock crouched a little so he was at the boy's level. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy told him softly. "Well," The Rock said with a smile, "you're tougher than you think. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Cena nodded. "Remember that. People like that biker, they only act strong because they're weak inside. You've got real strength, heart." Someone from the diner came out and handed the boy a towel to dry off. The boy smiled shyly and wiped his hands. The Rock took out his wallet and gave the boy a few bills. "Here," he said. "Get yourself something to eat. You've earned it." The boy shook his head quickly. "I can't take that," he said. The Rock smiled wider. "It's not a handout. It's a thank you for reminding people what kindness looks like." Cena chuckled. "He's right. Besides, we can't let you go hungry after a day like this." The boy finally accepted, his eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you," he said again, his voice trembling a little. The Rock gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Keep working hard, kid. The world notices people like you. Don't ever think it doesn't." The crowd was still talking, people taking photos and videos, some even thanking The Rock and Cena for stepping in. They both smiled, waved at a few fans, and then turned back to the boy. Before heading back into the diner, Cena said softly, "You're gonna be all right, kid. Don't let this shake your confidence. Keep washing those cars, keep smiling, and one day, that dream of yours will come true." The boy nodded. And for the first time since the incident began, he smiled fully. Not a nervous smile, but one full of hope. The Rock looked back at the road where the bikers had disappeared and said quietly, "Sometimes people forget what respect means. Maybe today reminded them," Cena replied. "Yeah. Sometimes standing up without throwing a punch is the strongest move you can make." The two men went back inside the diner, finished their coffee, and chatted with a few people who came to thank them. They didn't act like heroes. They acted like two regular guys who saw something wrong and chose to do the right thing. Outside, the boy went back to his job, wiping another car that had pulled up. But something was different now. People passing by smiled at him. Some even honked or waved. The diner owner came out and said, "You did good, kid. Don't let anyone mess with you again." That night, when the boy got home, he told his mother everything that happened. She was shocked at first, then smiled with tears in her eyes. "See," she said softly, "good things happen when you keep doing the right thing." The boy went to bed that night feeling something he hadn't felt in a while. Pride. Not the kind that makes you brag, but the kind that makes your heart lighter. He didn't just survive the day. He learned something about courage and kindness. As for the Rock and John Cena, they never talked much about that day in interviews. When asked, they'd just smile and say, "We just helped someone who deserved it." But everyone who saw it, in person or on the videos that later spread online, remembered it differently. To them, it wasn't just about two famous men stepping in. It was about a moment where humanity showed up, where strength didn't mean fists or fame, but standing up for what's right. And that moment changed everything. The next morning, sunlight poured through the small window of the boy's room. He opened his eyes slowly, still half unsure if what had happened yesterday was real or just a dream. The memory replayed in his mind, the loud motorcycles, the fear, then the calm but powerful voices of The Rock and John Cena standing up for him. He smiled softly. It wasn't a dream. It was real. He got up quietly, put on his faded shirt, and walked outside. His mother was already in the kitchen making breakfast. She looked up and smiled warmly. "You slept well?" she asked. He nodded, still feeling the excitement from the day before. When he stepped outside to go to work, the street felt different. People he usually passed without a word now waved to him. A man selling fruit nearby called out, "Hey, you're the boy from the video, right?" He froze for a second. "Video?" he asked. The man laughed kindly. "You haven't seen it? Everyone's talking about it. You and those two wrestlers, The Rock and John Cena. It's all over the internet." The boy blinked, not sure what to say. He didn't even have a smartphone that could play videos properly. "Really?" he asked shyly. "Really," the man said, nodding. "You're famous now, kid." As he walked to the gas station, he noticed more people looking at him. Some waved, others smiled or whispered among themselves. He wasn't used to attention, and it made him a bit nervous, but also proud in a way. When he reached the station, his boss was already there, talking to a group of reporters. Cameras and microphones surrounded the area. His boss spotted him and said, "There he is." "That's the boy." The reporters turned to him instantly. Lights flashed. One woman stepped forward with a microphone and asked, "Can you tell us how you felt when the bikers were picking on you?" He hesitated. His voice was small compared to the buzz around him. "I was scared," he said honestly. "I didn't want trouble. I just wanted to do my job." "And how did you feel when The Rock and John Cena stepped in?" Another reporter asked. He smiled softly. "Safe," he said. It felt like someone finally cared. The reporters nodded, and one of them said, "That moment touched millions of people. You've inspired a lot of hearts." The boy didn't know how to respond. He wasn't trying to inspire anyone. He was just being himself. But somehow, his simple act of staying calm and respectful had shown something beautiful. Kindness, humility, and quiet courage. Later that day, more people came to the gas station, not to fill their tanks, but to meet him. Some gave him small gifts, snacks, clothes, even envelopes with money. An older man placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You reminded me of my son. You've got a good heart, son. Don't ever change that." By evening, his boss told him to take the rest of the day off. "You've worked enough for now," he said with a smile. "Enjoy this moment." When he got home, his mother had tears in her eyes. "Look," she said, showing him a small TV on their table. The news was playing a clip of the diner scene. There he was, the boy wiping the bike, the biker yelling, then The Rock and Cena stepping in. The video ended with The Rock patting his shoulder and Cena handing him some money. The boy stared at the screen in silence. He never imagined something like this would happen to him, a boy who just washed cars for a living. Over the next few days, the story spread everywhere. Online, people were sharing it with captions like "Kindness wins" and "Real heroes still exist." Thousands of comments poured in, praising the boy for his humility and praising the Rock and Cena for their compassion. A week later, a black SUV pulled up near the gas station. "Tea?"